Prime Day es el 16 y 17 de julio. Con las ofertas épicas exclusivas para miembros Prime, recibe el reconocimiento que tanto mereces.
¡Wow! Gracias. Ni siquiera preparé un discurso. Quisiera agradecer a mi familia, que siempre necesita cosas. También a Sam, mi repartidor, por entregarme todas mis ofertas increíbles tan rápido. ¡Te adoro, Sam! ¡Mua!
Compra ofertas en electrónicos, hogar y más este Prime Day, del 16 al 17 de julio.
At Parker, our purpose is simple. We want to make the world a better place. By working more efficiently, by using more sustainable practices, by developing better technologies, we keep moving forward. With each new idea, innovation, and partnership, we're one step closer to fulfilling our purpose every single day. To find out more, visit parker.com/purpose. Parker, engineering your success.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. He's one of our favorites because he's sharp, he's up and coming. He's been all over media lately. He's been doing it. We're going to link to all his stuff. James Janowski, always great to have you back, our friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Man, you cover tech and stuff, so boy, howdy, is business a booming for you, my friend?
Yeah, it's always busy in the world of technology, especially now that Elon Musk is full-throated into it outside just Starlink and Tesla. Now he's into the social media stuff, and we're all just along for the ride.
Yeah, we'll talk about Musk for the most of this, but I wanted to ask you a big picture question first before we get into it.
Yeah.
We now know the Republicans are going to have the majority in the House, but not much, 5-6 seats, somewhere in that neighborhood. They're going to wind up with about 219. I also talk to you a lot because you pay attention to these hearings that get headlines, but people don't really pay attention to the ins and outs of it. We've talked about it over and over again. Tech companies, big tech regulations, social media, all these things. We're going to have hearings like we always have on them. They're going to pull them up there. The Republicans are going to be in charge of them instead of the Democrats now, like the last 2 years. What do you expect to happen in those hearing rooms? Because not to use Meta because Facebook co-opted that, but kind of the overarching theme has always been most of the time the congressional folks kind of look dumb and like they don't know what they're talking about in these hearings, but then the headlines come out about regulation. Do you expect there to be a noticeable change in the regulatory hearings and the pressure from Washington on these tech companies?
Yeah, I think that there will be some degree of change, given that Republicans did not go and take over both chambers, and the majority, as you noted, that they have is a little bit slimmer than I think people might have anticipated. I'm sure that will go and change what it might look like, but there's definitely an anticipated level of scrutiny that will come with the Republican leadership against tech companies, and some of it is certainly well-deserved. But, there's going to be a focus on oversight, and that's a good thing. I think that, they want to go and hold the Biden administration accountable for other areas where they've been less than ideal. And I think that they also want to look a little bit more closer at his son, Hunter Biden, and their family business dealings. They've been very clear about wanting to pursue that. But when it comes to technology, I'm sure we'll go and get back to the wonderful conversations around Section 230 and what things might look like in a Republican vision for 230 reform or some other kind of bill. Like, for example, Representative Jim Jordan and Representative Kathy McMorris Rodgers, they have a bill that would basically expand the Hatch Act, and that would be an effort to try to reduce the ability of a government actor to engage in what's called jawboning of these social media companies, essentially pressuring them to take action on content. That's something that we've heard about being reported through various outlets over the past year and change, whether that was the FBI and their interactions with Facebook or, DHS and their interactions with many of these social media platforms or other actors within the Biden administration, more broadly speaking. So Jen Psaki, for example, in that Missouri lawsuit that Eric Schmidt has over jawboning, she tried getting out of having to do a deposition, but the judge denied that motion. So she might have to go and get deposed by General Schmidt, who will soon be in the Senate as Senator Schmidt. and that team over there. So there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts. I think it opens up a lot of opportunities to have different kinds of conversations in technology that are very important. So I think that it's not all bad by any stretch of the definition, but there's actually a lot of good opportunities here too.
Yeah, James Janowski joining us. That's Congress. Do you see any change, because you do this all the time now? You've been doing all these hits. Do you see any change in how the news media is covering technology? Because it feels a little bit like we're in a bit of a narrative rut with big tech. I don't even like that term big tech because it's too expansive, but that's what we got to work with. Does it feel like we're in a little bit of a narrative rut here? It doesn't seem like we're really moving the ball on the news media or the investigation stuff. I know the Musk stuff's loud, but that kind of uncovered for me when I actually step back and look at it is like, oh, we're just taking all these existing narratives and then putting it on top of the Twitter thing instead of actually investigating what's happening with Twitter. And I'm just using that as an example. Does it feel that way to you? Because it seems like we're having the same tech conversation over and over again now. We're not really moving the ball forward much.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, right? Is that we're revisiting and relitigating a lot of the same conversations in terms of, like, let's say 230. It's about what it does and does not do. The constitutionality of a lot of these bills that are being presented and ideas. But there's definitely a vested interest in wanting to be critical of the tech companies. And again, some of it is deserved, and a lot of it, I would say, is not. I don't think, for example, that it's fair to go and put addiction for social media on kids. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily a fair claim. I don't think that the data bears that out. I think that there's a lot of focus on the negative because negativity sells, unfortunately. Particularly if it's tied to fear or outrage. So whether that's in the instance of going back to my previous comments, like the jawboning from government to the tech companies, or looking at, unfortunately, a child who died because she did a blackout challenge on TikTok. There's a lot of things that are happening, and none of them are great, but to go and put it at the feet of social media, I think is grossly inappropriate too. So I think that there's conversations that have to happen, but we also need to go and shift how some of it is being talked about and get to the root causes of what some of these issues are and what kinds of things we can do as a society to go and tackle some of those issues, because there are things that technology companies can do. And unfortunately, I don't like the big tech thing either, because I actually think that it lends them too much credence in that, they're these all powerful beings that can go and control so much. And yet, Twitter is a company that just got bought out by Elon Musk, and Meta's shaved $800 billion off of its market capitalization. So these companies are nowhere near as powerful as people would like to think, and they're making mistakes, and they can't really go and solve all these problems on their own. So I think that there's room for us to have conversations about other angles where we can go and tackle teen mental health or addiction or other kinds of problems that we're seeing pop up.
Yeah, James Janowski joining us. You just mentioned it. There seems to be a little bit of a shift on the business side. And this is one of the reasons I like talking about you, because you don't just talk about the content side. You understand the business side of this stuff. Amazon doing some paring back on their, what we used to call the enterprise side of a corporate business. I don't know if they use that term anymore, but the computer side, the technology side, drawdowns, drawbacks, stunting their own growth a little bit, doing some layoffs. Other tech companies, we've seen kind of an adjustment. What's going on with that? Is it the post-COVID era where everything got more online and now this is kind of a natural adjustment back? Look, trees don't grow to the sky is the old stock thing. Is Amazon just kind of reaching the cap of what it's going to be as a company? As big as it is, there is going to be a limit on it. What do you make of those kind of headlines in the tech space that we're seeing this? It's not a loss really, but it's more of a stunting of growth and some jobs paring back. But it's noticeable when it's one of the biggest companies in the world in Amazon that had exponential growth before this.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. And I think the reality is that when you look at the past few years, the COVID certainly played a role, especially with lockdowns. Everybody had to basically go online, which meant that a lot of their basic activities were shifted online. So these companies had a lot of money flowing into them as a result of that, by no fault of their own. And they invested to go and support that growth that they had. And now that we're out of the pandemic, or we're at least, putting it in the rearview mirror more so day by day, the problem becomes that basically these companies are realizing that they might have over invested or over allocated resources in these ways. So like Meta went and laid off 13% of its workforce at 11,000 jobs. Amazon laid off 10,000 jobs. you had Twitter basically lose well over 50% of its employee base by now. And if you added up all the different jobs that have been cut back in the tech industry in the past year, more or less, it adds up to well over 120,000 jobs that have been lost, which is larger than the dot-com bust back in the day during the early era of the internet as well. So I think that there's a lot of readjustment going on right now. Part of that's due to COVID. Part of that's due to bad investments. Even Disney is going and paring back and expected to do some layoffs. CNN is expected to do some layoffs. So everybody's feeling the pinch, right? And part of that's also due to the policies that were enacted during COVID that had led to a lot of inflation, which meant that access to capital was a little bit harder and more expensive. And then companies aren't as willing to make those investments when the cost of capital is a lot higher, right? So I think that there's a lot of factors going in here.
Yeah.
Prime Day es el 16 y 17 de julio. Con las ofertas épicas exclusivas para miembros Prime, recibe el reconocimiento que tanto mereces.
¡Wow! Gracias. Ni siquiera preparé un discurso. Quisiera agradecer a mi familia, que siempre necesita cosas. También a Sam, mi repartidor, por entregarme todas mis ofertas increíbles tan rápido. ¡Te adoro, Sam! ¡Mua!
Compra ofertas en electrónicos, hogar y más este Prime Day, del 16 al 17 de julio.
Yep, and Iger's back at Disney now too. We'll talk about that in the future. That's a very interesting development. James Zarnowski joins us. Okay, let's talk about the big disruption in tech that we've all been hearing nonstop for the last few weeks. Elon Musk at Twitter. Let's start with this part of it, though. For example, headline of the Atlantic right now: what will writers do without Twitter? Twitter is dying. I even put this out. I think that part of it's too much doom and gloom. I was joking on Twitter. I was like, I'd love to go back to like 1996 me and explain that there'd be this random Thursday night in 2022 where hundreds of people start sending me their phone number just to see the reaction.
Yeah.
I think the overreaction. I don't think it's going away because it's too ingrained of a platform. I think whatever's happening with Elon Musk is important, but I also think it's a phase one way or the other. I think the doom and gloom's overwrought. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, no, I certainly agree with you 100%. I think that people have looked at the Twitter situation with Elon Musk and they've come to their conclusions one way or another. And I think part of it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy where they want it to fail because they don't like Elon Musk since he's become such an unorthodox thinker in a public manner that would make them think that he is not necessarily aligned with them on every issue. So I think that certainly has drawn a fair bit of blowback where people want the platform to fail, undoubtedly so. And then, you see some of the changes that Elon's making, and there are certainly some, things that would be cause for concern for some folks. And that's why you're seeing some people go and leave over to Mastodon or exploring other options as well. I think that at the end of the day, though, the notion that Twitter is going to just die overnight, that's well overblown. I think that if you're talking about a company dying, like I look at Meta, and I think that their long-term prospects don't look great. And that's because they have a very difficult time right now of attracting young people to their platform in a profitable manner. And if you're Twitter, the problem isn't necessarily that. The problem is, how are you going to go and attract users to your platform and then attract ad revenue to your platform, since so many of these platforms are driven by ad revenue? How do you go and deliver that value to both sides of the equation while also maintaining your goal if you're Elon Musk of promoting more speech online? Unsurprisingly, it doesn't seem like too many people actually would like that goal, which puts him in conflict in some ways. So it'll be interesting to see how it all transpires. But I think that the writing Twitter off aspect of all this is just, it's loony. It's insane to me. I don't think this company is dying tomorrow. I do think that it's a company that, will go and hopefully set itself on the right track in the long run once Elon identifies that CEO for himself to go and execute his vision for the company.
Yeah, James Zarnowski. Here's the problem with the Twitter story as I see it. And I've got my strong thought. Look, we've done whole episodes still on Elon, you and me together. I have my strong thoughts on Elon, but there's really two parts to the Twitter story, because the truth is the average user on Twitter isn't noticing much of a difference right now on the content side of it. Now, I know, because I can read the business side. I know this is a horrible business deal. He way overpaid for it. He's way over leveraged. He's got a lot of things to do, all the Tesla stock. We could delve into all that. So I also understand the business side of it. But there's no way in the way we do things when we write an op-ed or we do a media hit to bridge those two things into one soundbite. It's not possible. And that's the part of the problem with the story. And then you've got the Elon thing on top of it, which he's just a huge personality who does whatever he wants to do because he's rich and famous and everybody tells him what a genius he is, and he has no guardrails. That's the third part of that story. Is that a fair way to parse it out? Is like, that's why people have a hard time getting to what's actually going on with that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard, because if you're a daily user, like, and it is not an unfair assessment, like, his former director of security, right, Yoel, was actually going over that in a New York Times op-ed where he was talking about how Elon empowered his team to go and take more action on content. So in some ways, they actually reduced the amount of bad things that you would see on Twitter under Elon Musk's tenure, despite all of his talk about wanting more speech and everything else. So there's actually, I think, a little bit of a disparity here between what it's being characterized as versus what the reality is on the ground with the actual platform itself. So it's easy to go and make those judgments. But we see that every single time, just like when it was originally announced that he was going to go and buy Twitter, all of a sudden conservatives saw upticks in their follower counts and, more engagement on their posts. And they're like, oh, Twitter's done something different. And the reality is that it's been the same thing it's been the whole time. Just more people choose to, leverage the platform in a different way all of a sudden because of expected differences in the future. So I think that it presents a very interesting conversation. To your point about Elon, he basically is the new Donald Trump of Twitter. The man is he's a lightning rod to any kind of conversation with anything he says. The second that he presses tweet, he's going to go and get everybody on either side of the equation just jumping right on in. And that also makes it very difficult from a business perspective, because it's like the man is literally his own worst headache in that instance. Now he reinstated Donald Trump last night, and it was just by a simple poll. And unsurprisingly, there are a lot of people who are happy about that. There are a lot of people who are very angry about that.
Yeah, he was going to do that anyway. The poll was the cover for it, but we'll parse that out some. Also, he happens to reinstate Trump. Why does Tesla has to do a massive recall? But I'm sure that was coincidental, Elon. But James Zarnowski is always great with this stuff. Here's where I'm at on the Elon stuff. And again, I'm not unbiased because I got my issues with the man. I think this was inevitable. We even talked about this back during the very long run up to him purchasing. I think the puppy caught the truck, and now the puppy's got to learn how to drive stick. When you take over a company like that, especially if you've never done a tech-heavy social media, look, engineers run those companies because they have to, because you got a platform to run. We knew there was going to be a learning curve. So Elon, it's louder and messier because he won't stop talking about it. He won't just go away and fix it. There's a large learning curve. I think we're just going to be in a period where he either gets bored with it or he appoints somebody and steps back from the day to day, because he's not going to do this forever. He can't. Nobody can. He's not going to do it. I think that's why I'm talking about is just kind of let this phase of Twitter go through, and then we'll see what Twitter would be. I think this goes another, maybe I said Christmas is where I put the over under. I think this goes a little while, and then it'll go back to running like a normal company as Elon steps back and they kind of do whatever his vision is going forward. I think then you panic. Right now, I don't think anybody really knows. I don't think Elon Musk knows. I don't think Twitter knows. I think this thing's just going to have to play out now that he put all this money into it. Is that a fair way to put it?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. I think I'll take the over on Christmas and expect that if he's going to go and do the change at CEO, it'll be a 2023 move. I think right now it's his plaything. And he's trying to go and move fast and break things in the traditional Silicon Valley way. Unfortunately, to your point, it's a steep learning curve because Twitter actually did a lot of things for a reason, like the blue check system was there for a reason. And him trying to democratize the blue check, while it sounds nice in theory, because of the way that it was deployed in the past, it's viewed as a trust system. So if all of a sudden an Eli Lilly, fake account pops up with a blue check on it saying that we're going to give away insulin for free, even though, he's decided to democratize the blue check, it does create a problem because, people are associating blue check with trust. So that's something that has to adjust over time. So I think that, ultimately he will go and appoint somebody for the company. That's what was always in the best interest of the company. And then it also goes and puts him like a degree removed from everything too. Because right now I think that he gets extra levels of scrutiny applied to him because of the fact that he's actively tweeting and being very aggressive in terms of some of his replies. Like, I mean, he's gone after sitting senators like Ed Markey, which is kind of interesting, and
not
Ed
the
Markey,
guy you want to go over either, because Ed Markey is not a social media senator. He's a nuts and bolts senator that actually knows how the mechanisms work. That's not the fight I would have picked if I was Elon, just to be frank.
Yeah, and Ed Markey had no problem, and not that I'm fond of it, but Ed Markey had no problem being like, do you really want to go and do this with like a sitting senator? Lots of people were very quick to point out that he sits on very key committees that Elon has business interests in. So as to whether or not that's like the wisest thing in the world is a separate question altogether. But again, that's Elon being a lightning rod at his finest. He really does not seemingly care, despite the fact that he's got billions of dollars tied up with some of these things, and senators can certainly be a legitimate threat to that. At the end of the day, like I said, I think Twitter will go and be fine. It's something that you have to let play out in the long run. So I've done a lot of media hits, as you've noted, on Elon Musk and Twitter lately. And the reality is that like one of the questions I get asked is like, what do you think the long-term future is there? Like, do you think it'll be around? Do you think it'll die? I'm like, it's a little unfair to judge it at this point. It's way too soon. You need to go. It's not going to die like in a month. If it's going to die, it's going to take at least 6 months, a year, if not longer. Because Elon's not just going to go and throw in the towel after 30, 45 days. Like, he's already talked about potentially doing a Chapter 11 restructure if he needs to. But he's already lost so much of the workforce, so he's done some cost savings that way too. So I think that there's a lot of things that he can do to make this right if he wants the company to survive in the long term. And I think that he genuinely does want that to be the case. So we'll have to see, is what I ultimately think on Elon and all of this.
Folks, if you've listened to the Heard Tell program, you've heard our friend Gabriella Hoffman, but you need to make sure you're checking out her podcast, District of Conservation. It's a podcast exploring the nuances of true conservation efforts from DC and beyond. From topic discussions to exclusive interviews with conservation and energy newsmakers, Gabriella keeps listeners appraised of the latest news stories while elevating important voices. Listen to District of Conservation on Apple Podcasts or wherever podcasts are played.
Yeah, James Janowski, I've got to ask you about it because it's a bubbling story that we're going to be hearing about for a while. It happened right as the election happened. I think buried it a little bit more. The FTX mess. I don't want to get into the crypto coin side of it so much because everybody has their preconceived notions on that. They filed this as a bankruptcy. Now, just quick background. Bankruptcy is a very specific legal action, especially when it comes to a major corporation. I think this thing goes criminal really, really fast because, and I've personally been through a bankruptcy. I've done it. I've talked to a couple of our lawyer friends. Like, their paperwork was so sloppy they can't even do the bankruptcy, is what I'm hearing from people that know. That's how bad this. People are like, well, is this like Enron? I'm like, no, this is multitudes worse than Enron. Enron had records. There's not even records for most of this stuff. Just for people who don't follow that space, because it is still a niche space as much as our Bitcoin friends want to be. I don't think people realize how explosive this story is going to be because this touches governments, this touches celebrities. This thing's going to get really, really ugly, and I think it gets in criminal court sooner rather than later because the bankruptcy court's not going to be able to move forward here.
Yeah, and I think that this is a case where like the technology and the fact that it was so niche kind of covered up what was already existing bad behavior from these actors at FTX. And I don't necessarily disagree with your assessment that it will turn criminal a lot faster. And to your point of it being worse than Enron, the guy who's running the bankruptcy for FTX was the guy who managed the Enron bankruptcy. And he was like, this particular one with FTX is the worst I've ever seen in my career, which would include Enron, which is kind of like a crazy thing to think about. that something can go on top of that. But they were so alarmingly bad, to your point about not really having any discernible documents tracking customer money. Their expense report system was kind of interesting, where it's like, hey, just submit it and then it'll get approved or denied via emoji. That sounds a little interesting. He had a personal loan given out to him by Alameda Research for $1 billion. This is the CEO of FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried. And then
they were dating. Let's get that out of the way.
Yes, and the person who was running Alameda was dating him. And then on top of that, his chief engineer got another $500 million personal loan too. Like, the kind of stuff that happened here was already criminal behavior. At the best case scenario, what you could argue is that it's gross incompetence of the likes of which we have never seen before. And that's your best case scenario. But realistically speaking, I do think that there was some legitimate fraud that was engaged in here. And those are already existing laws. And the problem is that because crypto's niche, the education gap meant that people were not quick enough to understand what exactly the guy was doing, and created a whole set of other problems here. So I think that that's where you need to focus looking forward. It's not about regulating crypto. It's about going and educating lawmakers, regulators, staffers about what crypto is not, what these different vehicles are. So that way we can avoid what XTF is, because the rise and fall of FTX in the span of a few years' time is something that's quite crazy. And in terms of the fraud, it's the largest financial scandal that we've had in the United States basically since Bernie Madoff. And that's kind of crazy. It's wild every single day that this story continues to develop. And it's something that we'll have to continue monitoring looking forward.
Yeah. James Zarnowski. All right. You pay way closer attention to this stuff, so I don't have to. I can just ask you about it. Give us 2 or 3 things that aren't Elon and not Facebook and not politically related. What's some tech stuff coming down the pike here as we start looking towards 2023? A lot of developments going on. What's 1 or 2 things you're really keeping an eye on as stuff that could be really important folks should be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the crypto side is impossible to ignore just because of that situation with FTX. It puts a lot of extra scrutiny on it. So, you've already seen like the New York Fed go and announce a pilot CBDC program. So that's something, a central bank digital currency. So that's something that will be interesting to see how that continues to unfold and what the results of that pilot are and what that means in terms of congressional action, if anything. And in general, I think, the other big one that we'll see talked about moving forward in 2023 is like kids and being online and their relationship with technology. That'll be one of the other big things as well. And then the one that I'm personally always very excited about that I think people should always keep an eye on is just our interactions with space in general. Like this year we had the rocket launched at an asteroid to see whether or not we could go and force the asteroid to move off of its projected path. As like a simulation in the event that you had like one of those disaster situations of an asteroid coming to kill Earth or something. That's actually really fascinating stuff. And as we start looking at how we can get into space more, I think that that's actually very exciting and might actually be a positive thing. I think it'll get us to shift off of the focus on big tech so much and let us go and engage in our inner nerd of wanting to go and, be Star Trek, the final frontier, and exploring space again, and wanting to engage in, asteroid mining and other kinds of cool technologies. So I'm personally excited about that one the most, but that's just me being a nerd at heart.
Yeah, we got to get you with our friend Dr. Michael Siegel, our space guy, because he just keeps saying like, "Oh, this is the most fascinating time ever in the history of space flight." Like, we're just not appreciating it. We just did an episode on that about a week ago. James Zarnowski, you always bring good information. You make sure to use small words so I understand it really well, even though you're one of these really super smart guys, and I appreciate that. Let folks know where they can keep up with you and follow you until we get you back on Herdtail again, my friend.
Yeah, so you can always go and follow me on Twitter at JamesCZ19. And then you can go and see my work at the Young Voices website, which is www.young-voices.com. And I have a personal website at jamesjarnowski.com too, where you can go and check out all the stuff that I'm doing. So thanks for having me, Andrew. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, he's so good now that at youngvoices.org, he's actually on the top banner now. Congratulations. You got a bump, my friend. And we'll have you on lots because technology is just, look, that's the fastest growing covered journalism beat there is. I just read about the other day. So we'll keep talking about it. You do great work. We'll talk again soon, my friend.
Prime Day es el 16 y 17 de julio. Con las ofertas épicas exclusivas para miembros Prime, recibe el reconocimiento que tanto mereces.
¡Wow! Gracias. Ni siquiera preparé un discurso. Quisiera agradecer a mi familia, que siempre necesita cosas. También a Sam, mi repartidor, por entregarme todas mis ofertas increíbles tan rápido. ¡Te adoro, Sam! ¡Mua!
Compra ofertas en electrónicos, hogar y más este Prime Day, del 16 al 17 de julio.